I want to welcome David Monahan to come up here. David is a patrol officer for the Champaign Police Department. He's also part of the crisis intervention team. He's from Urbana originally. He's a dad of two. And I don't know if you know this, but Champaign Police Department is one of 5. Let's try that one. Hi. Okay. So Champaign Police Department is one of 5 law enforcement agencies in the area, which includes Urbana Police Department, the U of I Police Department, the Rantoul, and also the Champaign County Sheriff. We're dedicated to serving our county and providing the highest quality law enforcement services. So please welcome Officer David Monahan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, first, I want to start by just thanking Mel and Rob, Tony, Terry, everybody at Sea at Home, my lovely and talented wife, Kelly Jane, the Phoenix coordinator. The full disclosure is I've been a police officer since September of 2015, so they asked the most experienced person they could find to be up here. This is obviously close to home for me because of what my wife does, working with the homeless population on a regular basis. We enjoy, I guess is the wrong word, the fact that we do have a lot of overlap in the clients that we serve. So when they asked to have somebody come talk about law enforcement and homelessness, the first thing that I thought of was, in my experiences, we deal with 2 different kinds of homeless people, and if I can generalize into 2 big groups, I would say that we deal with people that I would describe as situationally homeless. Those are people who have recently lost a job. They may have been the victim of domestic violence. They may have had a dispute with a roommate. They may have just been evicted. The circumstance has led them to be homeless. Those people, again, in my experience, are people that we deal with probably once, and then that's about it. I mean, these are people for whom services can do a great deal. Maybe they just need a little bit of extra time. They need the assistance of a friend or a family member or a church or somebody, and they can sort of get back on their feet relatively quickly. The other more obvious population, of course, would be what I would sort of think of as the chronically homeless, okay? What we think about more stereotypically as a homeless person. For the Champaign Police Department, a lot of who you deal with and where you deal with them is going to be dependent on where you work. So for those of you who aren't aware, our policing districts are broken up into quadrants, which we call the North District, South District, the Northwest District, and the Southwest District. The lines of demarcation for those are University Avenue and Prospect Avenue. So the South District is everything south of University, everything east of Prospect, which is mostly campus town. It's a lot of campus town. So obviously the people who work in the South District are going to deal with more chronically homeless people on a regular basis than, say, people who work in the Northwest District of town or possibly the Southwest District of town. So every officer's experiences are going to be somewhat different in terms of the volume of calls for service that involve a homeless person. One of the other things that I would like to point out to anybody who will listen, and actually we'll do audience participation. This is my favorite part. So if anybody wants to just hazard a guess, and anybody who's not in law enforcement or hasn't worked for a law enforcement agency, you're allowed to guess. At any given time, how many patrol officers are there patrolling the city of Champaign, let's say at 9 o'clock in the morning? If anybody just throw out a number, whatever you think, there's no wrong answers. How many Champaign police officers are patrolling the city at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning on a regular day? 12, 10, any other guesses? 7. 7 is generally the answer. Sometimes a little bit more. If we're lucky, like we joke, if we've got 8, we're stacked, and it's awesome. You're going to have a good day if we've got 8. Obviously, those numbers change over the course of the day. People smarter than me figure out when we need more people and where we need them. So I bring this up because obviously every call for service requires an officer respond. Some calls take longer than others. Some are more involved than others. So one of the One of the things that I think is important to recognize about people who are chronically homeless is that they are consumers of services on a level that, you know, a person who is not chronically homeless might not be. There are a lot of reasons for that. One, I think the biggest and most important reason, I think the thing that I'll talk about most here is the inextricable tie between the chronically homeless and people who struggle with substance abuse and mental illness. And I don't think that's a surprise to many people, that a lot of the chronically homeless people that we deal with on a regular basis, whether they be on campus town or elsewhere, are people who struggle with substance abuse and mental illness. For obvious reasons, those are people that it's going to be much harder to direct them towards services. It just is. One of the things that I was lucky enough to just participate in is we do something called, we do this in the state does this, but we have focused on it a lot in Champaign County, is the crisis intervention training. So we have a CIT training, it's a 40-hour class. Part of that is helping us to recognize signs and symptoms of mental illness, helping us to recognize the ties between mental illness and substance abuse. A big part of it, and I think one of the most important parts of it, is the notion that police officers, for better or for worse, and some would argue for better, some would argue for worse, we are, a lot of the time, frontline social workers. It's not necessarily what we signed up for, but as resources have diminished across the country and in the county, these are the expectations. Somebody has got to respond to somebody who's in crisis or is dealing with an issue that they can't resolve themselves, and that falls to us. And one of the things that I'm very proud to say that the Champaign Police Department, the Urbana Police Department, Champaign County Sheriff's Office has done is really emphasize that we are not just there to take enforcement action. And I think, you know, and again, I haven't been a police officer for very long, but I know traditionally that was the response. We are the police. We are law enforcement, so we show up someplace to enforce a law. Historically, for people who are homeless, that can be an ordinance violation. That could be something like disorderly conduct. It could be any number of things, and I think that the toolbox was not as stacked as it is now. And I think that just talking to some people who've been able to look at numbers in the Champaign Police Department, the number of instances where we take direct enforcement action for people, especially people who we would identify as possibly being in a crisis of some kind, has dropped considerably over the course of the years. And one of the reasons for that is because we're better at recognizing these sort of ancillary things that have to do with homelessness, and we're also, through things like the CIT training and other endeavors like that, we're better at helping to locate services and direct people towards appropriate services. And I think that's one of the big emphases of CIT, is that just selfishly going back to staffing issues, if we help to resolve a problem for somebody, or we help move them in a direction where they can start to resolve their own problems, if we can direct somebody towards a service that might help them, that is potentially 1 fewer, 10 fewer, 100 fewer times that we're going to get a call for service involving that person. And especially now that we're sort of in this mindset of not taking sort of as much direct enforcement action, and I don't want you to think that if somebody is breaking the law, we have to address it, okay? But what we're not doing is dealing with people who are sort of chronically homeless or addicts or mentally ill in the same kinds of ways that we did before. I'm going to sound like a homer because my wife runs it. For me, personally, one of the greatest assets has been the Phoenix. And I really do mean that. I mean, my ability to just make a phone call and have somebody come out, and I'll without naming names, I'll give you an example. We had a call for service of a gentleman who I've dealt with many times. I know to be a very nice guy. He's nonviolent. He's always been perfectly polite. He and I have had dozens of really nice conversations. As somebody that I try to talk to every time I see him. He spends a lot of time during the summer in a park in South Champaign. We got a call that somebody wanted him removed from a hotel in the north part of town, okay? This is clearly somebody, I know he doesn't have any place to go. I know this because I know him to be chronically homeless and somebody who deals with alcoholism. So as we're responding, they've already said his name, I know who it is, and I know as we're going, he's not gonna be welcome in the hotel anymore, and he doesn't have any place to go, it's cold outside, and I called my wife. And I ended up talking to Tony, who ended up, I think, talking to Terry. Terry was literally at the hotel about 35 seconds after I was, and put this guy in the car and helped find him a place to go. So selfishly, we quite like that, right? I mean, that's a pretty nice disposition to a call for a police officer, that somebody else comes and takes them someplace else, and then I don't write a report and I go home and have a snack. So, but for this gentleman, this was somebody who was, I don't know if this is still the case, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth at the Phoenix. I know this is somebody, when I talked to him, who was hesitant about going to the Phoenix. This guy was a loner. He didn't really want to be involved with people telling him, things. And he thought there was going to be a lot of pressure to do stuff and change things. So my hope is that little interaction, that positive interaction that he had with Terry, helps further him along in a journey where he might then go to the Phoenix to seek some kind of further help. And I know that's a big part of what they do. We've got Rosecrans. We've got crisis lines that we can call. The reality is there are not enough resources. I mean, the resources that we have are great, and I try to use them as often as possible. But I mean, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody in the room that we don't have nearly the kinds of resources that we would need to help make significant impacts in these people's lives immediately. And that's a shame. I mean, it's a shame, obviously, for these people who are homeless, these people who desperately need these resources. But it also puts a burden on the few resources that we do have. I mean, I'm super excited that there's going to be a shelter, even if it's temporary, just for the winter. It's going to make a huge difference. I know the warming shelter has been, as far as I understand it, a pretty big success. So, I mean, my perspective obviously is that on two levels. One is a human being, and a father and somebody who I like to think is compassionate. And I want to live in a community where we have opportunities to help people who need it. I'd like to be able to respond to a call and hand somebody a pamphlet with 15 different options and ask them to pick their flavor of whatever kind of help they'd like to have. And I understand that it's more complicated than that, and some people are not ready to seek that help, which is why, again, I think the Phoenix is such a great place, because it is pretty low pressure. It's about building relationships, which I think is great. But there's more work to be done. One of the things that the Champaign Police Department is doing, which I also think is awesome, starting sometime relatively soon, we're going to implement something that I think Urbana already does. I'm sure they already do it, where we're going to start tracking our CIT calls for service, so that if we respond to a call and somebody is in crisis for whatever reason, and again, these are the people who are consuming our services the most. They're not necessarily going to be homeless people, but they may well be people with chronic mental illness and substance abuse problems. What we'll do is, if we write a police report, we will be able to document in a separate field in the report writing software that we already use the element of that call that involved their crisis, whatever that may be. If we don't write a police report, then we can do what's called a field interview card. It's just a little, like 3x5 card that we fill out when we talk to people. That can also get entered. And what that will enable us to do is start looking for where the holes are, where the gaps in service are, for particular people, again, who monopolize our resources. So for the people, and we do have these people in town that, we can sometimes respond 4, 5, 6 times in a shift to the same person, and oftentimes they are homeless. This will help us to start identifying those people and hopefully start trying to fill in some of the gaps for those people. I'm not sure if any of this made sense at all. I apologize if it didn't. I think that's it. I'm just going to say that's it. If you guys have questions, please feel free. Lieutenant Vogelzang is in back there, so no, he doesn't have to answer any question. Yeah, I'm more than happy to answer whatever I know. If I don't know the answer, I apologize if I say I don't know the answer. I was joking with somebody earlier that my goal is to not set policy for the Champaign Police Department or any other agency tonight. So there's a chance that I may say I don't know what the answer is and I'm not willing to guess, so that people don't leave here and say, well, guess what CPD's doing now? So fire away if anybody has anything at all. No? Okay. Yes. No, she'd probably be better.
The warming shelter is at 2 different churches. Currently, Sunday through Thursday is at First Presbyterian. That's overnight 9:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. For men.
And I think that's an important consideration, is that a lot of the services that are available depends a lot on we have some more services than others. For example, if you're a female who is a victim of domestic violence, there's a better chance that I can direct you towards somebody who's going to help you immediately than, say, if you're a chronically homeless, mentally ill person who also has a substance abuse problem. I mean, that's just the way it is for right now, at a lot of places, but here in particular. Anything else? Yes.
What kind of actions can be taken with someone who you're visiting multiple times per day?
It's an excellent question. It is actually that reminds me of a point that I wanted to make that it seems silly, and it is silly to say it out loud, that it's not illegal to be homeless. It's not illegal to be mentally ill. So there's a point at which I can't take enforcement action. It's one of the weird things that I've found doing this job, is that you sort of have to be careful about what you do and say. Okay. You have to be careful about what you do and say, because when I do wear this uniform, it's sort of official. So I can offer help. You don't like this one?
No.
Okay, sorry. I don't have to use it, do I? Yes, sorry. We can offer help to people, but there's a point at which, and just full disclosure here, don't tell anyone. There's a point at which, when you're on your 5th or 6th call for service with the same person, and there is nothing to do, that you have the discussion of, is there anything that we can arrest this person for? And and it's not for me, because usually at that point I'm getting ready to go home. It's most often for them, because whatever's going on for them in that moment in time or that day, they're in crisis. I mean, that's the way we talk about it, is they are in crisis. And if they are unwilling or able to seek help for that crisis, sometimes the best thing is for them to go someplace safe. And unfortunately, and I think Sheriff Walsh would agree, that the Champaign County Jail is sometimes the most viable option. They are the largest provider of mental health care in Champaign County. And we're not alone in that. I think you find that in counties across the country, certainly across the state. So there are some times where we say, all right, this disorderly conduct or a relatively minor offense, if they've committed it. We're not making things up, but whereas normally an officer might use discretion and say, well, go away from here and don't come back, and we'll be done with it. Sometimes that's the route, unfortunately, that we do take. which is sad, really. Yes.
What are the trends in chronic homelessness? I know some people move around, some of these people move around from city to city, but is it increasing in Champaign or decreasing in Champaign?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know apocryphally, so just hearing it from people, that there are definitely people who come to Champaign because they think that there are resources here. They're told by somebody else in like Peoria was like, "Hey, you should go to Champaign. There's definitely like a whole bunch of things for you to do there," and there aren't a lot of things. There aren't a lot of resources, so people sort of find that out the hard way. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know over time. I don't even know if that's something that we track adequately. Hopefully, that's something we'll get better at tracking. So I can't say, and I haven't been doing it long enough to say, oh, well, 10 years ago it seemed like there were more or there were fewer. So, yes, ma'am.
I've got two questions.
Yes.
One, do you find people that are breaking the law on purpose because they would prefer to be in jail just because it's warm?
Yes.
And two, when you develop rapport with these guys, because you see them all the time, does it make them lose a little respect for the law? I mean, for you as an officer, because hey, should I start?
No. Yeah. So your question was, do we encounter people who break the law on purpose to go to jail because they want it to be warm? The answer is yes. Yes, it does. I had a friend of the Phoenix, somebody that is a regular around town, told me one time that he walked up to the front door of the Champaign Police Department and peed on it because he wanted to go to jail and was upset that no one saw him. I mean, it's the truth, and I don't know if it's true or not because of this. I mean, this person has a mental illness, but the short, I believe it. I mean, it's believable that he actually did this. That's a shame. To answer the other question is that when we do build rapport with people, does it make it harder to do our job? And the short answer is no, absolutely not. One of the things that I think that I really like most about this job is that I try to develop rapport with everybody, and you could be a murder suspect and I'd take you to jail for it, or we could have just fought. It doesn't really. I mean, the short answer is that if I know somebody well, or if I've had a lot of conversations with them, my hope is that it makes my job easier to take them to jail if they do need to go. I mean, that's the goal, is that they're probably less likely to fight you or argue with you, and I think that's true across the board.
How do you address panhandlers?
Well, that's a good question. So there are a couple of pertinent in the city. I can only speak for the city of Champaign. We have a city ordinance that deals with aggressive panhandling. And you can look up the exact wording, but it essentially means that if somebody asks you for money on the street and you say no, and they follow you or behave in a way that makes you like reasonably apprehensive of being battered, or it essentially means that somebody can sit and hold a cup and ask for money, but they can't be aggressive. They can't follow you around. They can't obstruct business doors, things like, so what you find is there are people, for instance, if you go down to 6th and Green, there are a number of homeless men down there especially who sit in the same spot every day, and they don't bother anybody, and officers who conduct foot patrols in that area know them by name, and they're very friendly, and it is what it is. There's a second, the Illinois Vehicle Code has a provision about accepting, it's asking for rides or money on the roadway. Basically what that means is that if I stand on the street and I accept money from somebody who's in a car, there's a state law in the Vehicle Code prohibiting that. That obviously, for us, it's a slightly different thing, which we probably discourage more, just given the fact that people are then standing on the roadway, approaching cars. A, it's dangerous for them. B, it's not a good situation for anybody, really. as in all things, we use our discretion. So, you know, there are times when a business might ask that a panhandler be moved along, just not because they're bothering anybody per se, but just maybe because they're obstructing the doorway to somewhere. 99 times out of 100, we would just ask them politely to go someplace else. I mean, that's really it. And that sort of comes back to the thing where we're taking fewer of those encounters are ending in some kind of enforcement activity than in the past. And again, I think it's because we're doing a better job of recognizing some of these other things that are going on for people, as opposed to just showing up as the police and being like, hey, beat feet, or, you know. Okay, I got the wrap it up sign, so that's it. I want to say thank you again I told Mel and I told my wife, it's amazing to me. I grew up in Urbana. As far as I know, there's never been anything like this in Champaign, Urbana before. I just want to say thank you to you guys for coming out here and doing this. I think it's incredible. Driving downtown and seeing the number of people out here doing this it's amazing. So thank you guys for being here. Thanks for having us. And feel free, if you have questions about this stuff, if you'd like, flag us down and talk to us about it. We'd be happy to answer questions out on the street, or, you know, the more you guys know, the better it is for us too. So thank you very much for